Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating intersection of environmental policy and civil liberties in Austria. We're going to look at how a massive physical transformation of the country's landscape ended up colliding head-on with a wildly controversial legal crackdown.
We have to start with a pretty stark reality, and it's represented by the number 10. According to data from the WWF and the EU Environmental Bureau, Austria paves over a staggering 10 hectares of soil every single day. That's right, 10 hectares daily. This relentless rate of soil consumption actually makes the Alpine Republic the outright European champion in soil sealing. To really put that into perspective for you, in just one recent year, 36 square kilometers of land were consumed. That is literally the size of the entire city of Eisenstadt. Gone, just paved right over.
And this perfectly highlights a massive gap between the government's goals and what's actually happening. Officially, the target is to reduce land consumption to 2.5 hectares a day by 2030. But the reality on the ground? It's sitting at an average of 11.3 hectares per day over a 3-year period. The sheer speed of construction for commercial areas and roads is just vastly outpacing those intended ecological targets.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the soil sealing crisis. Second, the animal rights crackdown. Third, the mafia paragraph. Fourth, a controversial trial. And finally, the acquittal and aftermath.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the soil sealing crisis, paving over nature.
Now, before we get into the legal battles, we absolutely have to understand the physical toll here, because the sheer scale of the ecological cost is frankly staggering. Just think about this. Austria has built a road network that's literally long enough to circle the Earth more than 3 times, over 127,500 kilometers. Because of this massive infrastructure expansion, a full third of native plant and animal species are now sitting on the endangered list. On top of that, river infrastructure is threatening 60% of domestic fish species. And here's the kicker for those living in cities. Because paved sealed soil loses its natural ability to evaporate water and cool the air, urban areas are increasingly turning into severe heat islands.
So the physical pressure on the environment is incredibly intense. But this brings us to a crucial, even bigger question. When the physical landscape is treated this way, how exactly does the state treat the civil society activists, whether they're fighting for the environment or animal rights, who actually speak up and try to protect it?
Moving on to Section 2, the animal rights crackdown. Activism under fire. Here, we see a truly astonishing escalation of state power aimed directly at animal rights NGOs, specifically those campaigning against practices like battery cages and the fur trade. This timeline maps out a harrowing, multi-year ordeal. It all started pretty quietly in 2007 with undercover police surveillance, but then violently escalated in May of 2008 with home raids and arrests. Activists were released from pretrial detention in September 2008, but the whole thing culminated in a massive court battle that didn't end in a complete acquittal until May 2011.
Let's zoom in on that escalation for a second, because it's wild. Imagine waking up to armed mass SWAT teams at your front door. On May 21, 2008, police raided 23 homes and NGO offices across Austria. They seized computers, donor databases, accounting records, basically the whole shebang, effectively paralyzing these organizations overnight. 10 prominent activists were arrested and thrown into pre-trial detention for over 100 days. And get this, initially, they weren't even presented with specific individualized criminal charges.
This brings us to Section 3, the mafia paragraph. A legal weapon?
So, you might be wondering, why on earth did the state use such extreme, militarized tactics against civil society groups? Well, they relied on Section 278A of the Austrian Criminal Code. Now, this is a statute explicitly designed to combat organized crime. We're talking mafia syndicates, drug cartels, and human trafficking rings. The whole situation sparked a global controversy, precisely because a law meant for the actual mafia was being applied to NGOs advocating for animal welfare. The state's argument? They alleged that the activists' coordinated campaigns and protests essentially constituted a covert criminal organization.
Let's look at how that held up in Section 4. A controversial trial, evidence unravels.
When the trial finally kicked off in Wiener Neustadt in March 2010, the prosecution's narrative of this deeply hidden militant network came under some heavy scrutiny. And honestly, the state's case essentially collapsed under its own weight right there in the courtroom. There were some major, almost unbelievable absurdities. For instance, an undercover police agent going by Danielle Durand was embedded with the NGOs for 16 months and testified to seeing exactly 0 crimes. A key state linguistic expert, he made 178 copying errors in his analysis. At one point, an alleged bomb supposedly stockpiled by an activist turned out to be soy milk. Yeah, soy milk. On top of that, standard, legally registered peaceful protests were routinely officially documented by the authorities as militant activity.
Impartially speaking, this trial became a very stark battle of definitions. On one hand, you had the state framing the activists' behavior as extortion, coercion, property damage, and the operation of a criminal enterprise. On the other hand, the defense stood firm, maintaining that these groups were merely engaging in democratic engagement, standard, legal public campaigning, and peaceful demonstrations.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Acquittal and Aftermath, the True Cost.
Let's look at the conclusion of this unprecedented legal saga. On May 2, 2011, after a grueling 14-month trial, the judge delivered a sweeping verdict. She acquitted all the activists of all charges. The court was incredibly explicit, stating that there was 0 evidence of a criminal organization and absolutely no proof linking the accused to any alleged acts of sabotage. They were completely and totally vindicated by the law.
But as you can probably guess, vindication in court doesn't necessarily mean you walk away unharmed. Take a look at this staggering number, 5.2 million euros. That represents the collective financial ruin faced by the acquitted activists. See, in Austria at the time, compensation for legal defense in the event of an acquittal was capped at just 1,250 euros. So despite being found entirely innocent, these people were left to shoulder over 5 million in legal fees, not to mention dealing with lost jobs and completely derailed lives.
The international community definitely took notice of this. Legal scholars like Gary L. Francione really hit the nail on the head, pointing out the dark irony of the situation. He said, "It is very disturbing to see liberal democracies that supposedly celebrate the rule of law routinely ignore it." Even Amnesty International stepped in, warning that applying anti-mafia laws to non-governmental organizations like this creates a massive, chilling effect on the fundamental democratic right to protest.
I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on. We started this explainer by looking at those 10 hectares of Austrian soil paved over every single day. We then saw the immense, crushing power of the state brought down on people who advocate for nature and animals. So, if democratic engagement and advocating for a paved-over environment can literally cost you your freedom and your finances, who will dare to step up and protect the planet tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a clear, engaging look into this incredibly complex case.